As a neurologist who has spent decades treating patients with strokes and other brain-related conditions, I thought I had seen every possible trigger and every possible scenario. I believed I understood the risks inside and out, until last year, when I stumbled upon something that completely changed my perspective. What I discovered was not just surprising, it was deeply unsettling. A simple vegetable, one eaten by millions of people every week, especially those over the age of 60, turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone had realized. This was not the type of danger you can see or feel immediately. It worked silently, invisibly, but with devastating power, setting the stage for strokes that could strike without warning. When I first read the research, I thought it was an exaggeration, but as I dug deeper into peer-reviewed medical studies and connected what I was seeing in my own patients, the pattern became undeniable. Certain compounds inside everyday vegetables, foods we've been told our whole lives to eat for health, were creating conditions inside the body that could thicken the blood, inflame the arteries, and reduce blood flow to the brain by nearly half. The scary part is that most seniors have no idea. They trust these foods, and many even increase their consumption as they age, believing they're making healthier choices. Yet, time after time, I began to see how these supposedly healthy vegetables could play a role in dangerous cerebrovascular events. The realization didn't come all at once. It unfolded case by case, study by study, until it became impossible to ignore. I remember one of my patients, a 67-year-old woman who seemed to be in perfect health. She exercised, didn't smoke, and followed what she thought was an excellent diet. Just 72 hours after making a change to include more of one specific vegetable, she suffered a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke that left her terrified and me deeply unsettled. I couldn't dismiss it as coincidence, especially when I saw similar stories repeated with other patients. That's when I decided to piece everything together, looking not just at individual cases but at the underlying biochemistry and the large-scale research that had been published quietly over the years. What I found shocked me. 5 very common vegetables were emerging again and again in the data. They weren't exotic, obscure foods. They were sitting in kitchen refrigerators, tossed into salads, blended into juices, baked into casseroles, and served at dinner tables everywhere. And for people over 60, the risks appeared to multiply. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Take spinach, for example. For decades, spinach has been touted as the ultimate superfood. Rich in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, it has been recommended in countless diet plans and medical guidelines. But what's rarely discussed is its oxalate content. Oxalates are natural compounds that don't just disappear after digestion. In older adults, they can build up, binding with calcium and forming sharp microscopic crystals. These crystals don't just sit idly in the body, they scratch and irritate the delicate linings of blood vessels. Over time, that irritation becomes inflammation, and inflammation becomes plaque buildup, narrowing the arteries that feed the brain. I still remember Sarah, a patient in her late 50s who came into the emergency department one night unable to move half her face. She thought she was being healthy by eating spinach salads every day, but her lab results showed oxalate levels 3 times higher than normal. Her kidneys, already less efficient with age, couldn't keep up. That constant buildup had quietly been turning her arteries into a ticking time bomb, and then there were beets. Beets are often celebrated for their nitrates, which convert into nitric oxide and supposedly help circulation. For younger people with flexible arteries, that might be true. But the situation changes drastically after 50. Aging blood vessels lose elasticity. When beets flood the system with nitric oxide, the sudden expansion and contraction of those stiffened vessels becomes unpredictable. Instead of gentle support, it creates whiplash-like pressure changes, the hydraulic hammer effect, as we call it. In one unforgettable case, a 62-year-old cardiologist, someone who spent his entire career advising others on heart health, was rushed to my care after suffering a hemorrhagic stroke. He had been drinking beet juice every morning, convinced he was helping his body. But those daily jolts to his blood pressure weakened his cerebral vessels, until one day, they gave way. It took me 6 hours in the operating room to save his life. What haunted me most was how preventable it might have been had he known the hidden risks. Tomatoes brought another layer of surprise. They seem harmless, even heart-healthy, but for aging brains, their hidden load of histamines and solanine is a real concern. Histamines cause blood vessels to spasm unpredictably, while solanine, an alkaloid that plants produce to defend themselves, becomes harder to break down as we age. The enzymes needed to neutralize it decline sharply after 60. That means older adults may experience greater vascular inflammation after eating tomatoes than they did in their younger years. I once treated a 70-year-old retired teacher who arrived at the hospital completely unable to speak, her right side paralyzed. Her family told me she had complained of headaches after eating her homemade tomato sauces. Her blood work revealed inflammatory markers off the charts. The connection was clear, and though we were able to stabilize her, the damage was irreversible. She later told me she had no idea that tomatoes could play such a role. And why would she? Nowhere in mainstream dietary advice is this possibility. Even mentioned potatoes, perhaps the most comforting of comfort foods, carry their own hidden threat. The glycemic index of white potatoes is among the highest of any staple food, higher even than sugar. Each serving sends blood sugar surging, forcing the body into a storm of insulin production and oxidative stress. For blood vessels, that roller coaster is brutal. Over years, it creates glycation, where sugar molecules attach to proteins in the vessel walls, leaving them brittle and unable to respond properly to the body's needs. One patient of mine, a lifelong construction supervisor, collapsed at his dinner table after years of nightly mashed potatoes. The clot in his middle cerebral artery nearly ended his life, and when we examined his vascular health, it was as though his arteries had aged decades beyond his actual years. To him, potatoes were harmless, just a side dish he'd enjoyed his whole life. But the constant glucose assaults had left scars that eventually caught up with him. The vegetable that disturbed me most, however, was corn. Corn is woven deeply into modern diets, not just in its fresh form, but also in oils, syrups, starches, and countless processed foods. What shocked me was the combination of risks all converging in this one food: the high omega-6 fatty acid load creating inflammatory imbalance, the blood-thickening effects, and the presence of fungal toxins like aflatoxins and fuminizins that damage vessel linings. One patient, a woman in her late 50s, had incorporated corn into nearly every meal: cornbread, corn oil, and corn on the cob. When she arrived at my hospital unable to move or speak, her blood markers told a story of extreme inflammation. Surgery revealed multiple clots in her brain circulation. Later testing confirmed what the studies suggested. The combination of corn's inflammatory compounds and its contaminants had fueled a perfect storm inside her body. Eliminating corn from her diet, alongside therapy, helped her recover some function. But the experience was life-altering. By the time I connected all these cases with the research, I could no longer ignore what I was seeing. The foods we assume are universally healthy can, under certain conditions, especially in older adults, create risks few people ever consider. Spinach with its oxalates, beets with their nitrate swings, tomatoes with solanine and histamines, potatoes with their glucose assaults, and corn with its inflammatory load, they each play a role in setting up the brain for disaster. This is widely taught in medical school. None of it is emphasized in dietary guidelines. And yet, I've seen the consequences firsthand on the operating table, in emergency rooms, and in rehabilitation clinics. The story doesn't end with warning signs, though. Just as some vegetables can quietly harm, others can actively protect. I've watched patients transform their risk profiles by choosing differently. Broccoli, with its sulforaphane, seems to help repair blood vessel damage at the molecular level. Purple cabbage, rich in anthocyanins, fortifies vessel walls, making them more resilient against clotting and rupture. Garlic, perhaps the most remarkable of all, not only thins the blood naturally, but also dissolves existing clots and prevents new ones from forming, in some cases performing better than medications. Patients who made these substitutions saw dramatic drops in inflammation markers, improved imaging results, and in some cases even reversal of blockages once thought permanent. Every time I share this information, I ask people the same two questions. Have you eaten any of these 5 risky vegetables in the past day? And after those meals, have you noticed dizziness, headaches, or strange fatigue? These subtle symptoms may be your body's warning signs. I encourage everyone to reflect on their own experiences because patterns often emerge when you pay attention. Some may dismiss these concerns as alarmist, but after seeing stroke after stroke in patients who thought they were eating well, I can't stay silent. What I've learned is sobering, but also empowering. The choices we make at the table are not trivial. They can mean the difference between resilience and vulnerability, between living independently and living with permanent disability. I've watched lives change for the worse when the wrong foods silently did their damage. But I've also watched lives turn around when awareness led to better choices. I believe everyone deserves to know this truth before it's too late, because strokes don't announce themselves in advance. They don't give second chances. So I share this not to frighten but to awaken. The vegetables you thought were your allies may, in certain contexts, be quietly undermining your brain health. At the same time, the right choices can arm your body with defenses that are more powerful than most prescriptions. The science is there, the patient stories are there, and now, I hope the awareness will be there too. Think carefully about what's on your plate, because what seems small, a salad ingredient, a side dish, a cooking oil, can carry consequences larger than anyone ever warned you about. I've seen it firsthand, and I know how high the stakes are. Choose wisely, because your brain depends on it.